The morning I found out, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a bank statement I almost did not open. My name was missing from the property deed, not misspelled, not moved to page 2, gone, erased, replaced with my brother's name and a date that matched my wedding anniversary almost to the day. My wife was in the next room humming to herself like it was just another morning. And the worst part, the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, is that she knew. She had known for over a year. And she had looked me in the eye every single morning and said nothing. Before we go any further, I need to ask you something. If the person sleeping next to you for 11 years had been quietly helping someone else take what was yours, would you have seen the signs? Because David did not. And the question that will follow you through this entire story is not whether he should have known sooner. The question is, what do you do when the betrayal goes that deep, and the people who did it are still sitting at your dinner table? Stay with me. Because David's answer is not what anyone expected. The morning I found out, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and a bank statement I almost did not open. My name was missing from the property deed, not misspelled. Not moved to page 2, gone, erased, replaced with my brother's name and a date that matched my wedding anniversary almost to the day. My wife was in the next room humming to herself like it was just another morning. And the worst part, the part that still makes my chest tight when I think about it, is that she knew. She had known for over a year, and she had looked me in the eye every single morning and said nothing. Before I tell you everything, I want you to understand something about the kind of man I was before all of this happened. I'm not saying I was perfect. I am saying I was loyal. I was the type of person who answered his phone on the first ring when someone in the family needed help. I was the one who drove 2 hours in the middle of winter because my mother-in-law said the furnace was making a strange sound. I was the one who signed for things without reading the fine print because I trusted the people handing me the pen. That is the version of David that this story is about. The one who trusted too much, stayed too long, and gave too much without ever thinking to check. I grew up in a working-class family in a mid-sized city where everyone knew everyone. My father was a contractor. My mother managed the books. We were not rich, but we were careful with money, and we built something steady over 2 decades. When my father passed away 11 years ago, he left behind a small property portfolio. 3 houses, a piece of commercial land near the edge of town, and a retirement account that he had been adding to quietly since I was 12 years old. The will was clear. My brother Marcus and I were to split everything equally. Marcus would manage the commercial land. I would hold the residential properties. Simple, documented, legal, except Marcus had a different plan, and my wife, Sandra, had apparently decided somewhere along the way that his plan was better than mine. I need you to understand how long it took me to even suspect anything. 11 years. 11 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings and loan signings and property renovations. 11 years of Sandra telling me Marcus was just stressed, that his wife was going through something, that his business was struggling, that I should cut him slack. 11 years of me nodding and saying okay and cutting the slack. I was not naive. I just loved them both. I thought love meant patience. I thought loyalty meant you did not keep score. I was wrong about almost all of that. Let me take you back to where it actually started. Not the bank statement. That was just the proof. The real beginning was a dinner at my mother's house about 14 months before I found the statement. My mother had been unwell. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that she had started talking about her own arrangements. She pulled Marcus and me into the back room after dinner and told us she had updated her will and that her lawyer had everything documented. She was calm about it. Practical, she handed each of us a sealed envelope and said to open them privately and call the lawyer if we had questions. She said she loved us both equally and made her decisions based on what she thought was fair. I did not open the envelope that night. I put it in the drawer of my home office and told myself I would read it over the weekend. Sandra was standing in the doorway when I put it away. She said nothing. She just watched me slide the envelope into the drawer and close it. I remember thinking she looked tense, but I told myself she was just tired. It had been a heavy evening. I went to make tea and did not think about it again for 3 weeks. When I finally opened the envelope, it was a Tuesday afternoon. Sandra was at work. I sat down at my desk and read through the letter slowly. It was a summary note from my mother, not the legal document itself, but it outlined how she intended to divide her remaining assets. The residential property on Callaway Street, the one she had lived in for 32 years, was to go to me. 2 smaller investment accounts were split between Marcus and me. A piece of jewelry and some personal items went to Sandra by name, which I thought was a warm gesture. Everything seemed straightforward. Except there was one line near the bottom that I read 3 times and still did not fully understand. It said that any transfers or title amendments made in the previous 18 months would be reviewed by the estate as part of the settlement process. I did not know what that meant at the time. I figured it was standard legal language. I put the letter back in the drawer and forgot about it for another 7 months. Those 7 months were not empty. Looking back now, I can see exactly what was happening, but at the time I was just living my life. Sandra and I had been married for 9 years at that point. We had a decent marriage, not a passionate one maybe, but a stable one. We cooked dinner together most nights. We took a vacation every summer. She had her book club on Thursdays. I had my woodworking projects in the garage on weekends. We were comfortable in the way that long-term couples become comfortable, which sometimes means you stop paying attention to the small things. One of the small things I stopped paying attention to was how often Sandra and Marcus talked on the phone. I had always known they got along well. Marcus had been charming with her from the very beginning, and I was glad. Some brothers-in-law create friction. Marcus always seemed like an asset. He remembered her birthday before I did. He texted her funny videos. He called her by a nickname I had never given her. I told myself it was just warmth, family warmth. I was grateful for it. What I did not know was that those phone calls had a second purpose. I found out later, from a source I will tell you about in a moment, that Marcus and Sandra had been meeting for coffee on her Thursday afternoons for at least 2 years. Not book club, Marcus. And the conversations, according to what she eventually admitted, had shifted somewhere in the middle of year 2 from catching up to planning. The first concrete sign that I missed completely was a phone call from our family accountant, a man named Gerald who had handled my father's estate and continued working with me after he passed. Gerald called me on a Friday morning about 8 months before I found the bank statement. He said he was doing his annual review of the property documents and had noticed something that needed clarification. He asked if I had authorized a quiet title transfer on the Maplewood property. I said no. He said he would look into it and get back to me. He did not get back to me. I did not follow up. I was in the middle of a renovation on one of the rental houses and I let it slip. That is the thing about betrayal that nobody talks about. It does not happen in one loud moment. It happens in 100 quiet moments where you almost asked the right question and then got distracted. It happens in the small decisions to trust instead of verify. It happens in the moments where you feel a shadow pass over you and you tell yourself it is just a cloud. The shadow was real. I just was not ready to look at it yet. 7 months after I read my mother's letter, Sandra came home with a new car, nothing exotic but new. A mid-level SUV that she had apparently put a down payment on during her lunch break. She seemed excited, a little nervous underneath the excitement, but excited. I asked her how she had paid for the down payment. She said she had been saving a small account I did not know about. I nodded. I told her it looked great. I did not ask to see the account. I should have. 2 weeks later, Marcus came to dinner and I noticed something different about him. The edge of stress he had been carrying for the past couple of years was gone, not reduced. Gone. He was relaxed in a way I had not seen since before his first business failed. He joked more. He ate more. He kept catching Sandra's eye across the table in a way that I registered and immediately told myself was nothing. Just two people who were comfortable with each other. Just family warmth. The dinner ended the way they always did. Sandra cleared the plates. Marcus helped. I made coffee. We sat for another hour and talked about nothing important. When Marcus left, he hugged Sandra a beat longer than he hugged me. I stood in the doorway and watched him walk to his car, and I felt something I could not name at the time, something between confusion and a warning I was not ready to hear. That feeling stayed with me for 3 days. On the 4th day, a Monday morning, I went to my home. He officed to grab a folder for a meeting, and I accidentally knocked the desk drawer open. The letter from my mother's estate fell out onto the floor. I picked it up and read it again, and this time I stopped at that same line near the bottom. Any transfers or title amendments made in the previous 18 months would be reviewed as part of the settlement process. I called Gerald. He picked up on the second ring, and I could tell from the way he said my name that he had been waiting for this call. He told me he had done some digging after our conversation 8 months earlier. He had found a title transfer document on the Maplewood property dated 22 months ago. The transfer had moved the property from joint ownership between me and my brother into Marcus's name alone. It was notarized. It had a signature on it that looked like mine. Gerald paused and then said very carefully that he did not believe it was my signature. I sat very still for a long time after he said that. I asked him what he meant. He said the notary stamp was from a firm in a city 3 hours away where neither Marcus nor I had any known connections. He said the signature matched mine in some ways, but that there were inconsistencies a trained eye would catch. He said he had not reported anything officially because he wanted to speak to me first. He asked me to come to his office. I went that afternoon. Gerald laid out 3 documents on his desk. The first was a copy of my father's original will. The second was the title deed for the Maplewood property as it stood when I inherited it. The third was the amended title deed with the signature that was supposed to be mine. He pointed to the 3 signatures side by side. My father's signature on the will, my genuine signature on the original deed, and the forged signature on the amended deed. I looked at them for a long time. The forged one was close. Very close, but there was something slightly off about the way the D curved in my last name. I had noticed it 1,000 times on my own signature because I had always thought it was the most distinctive part of how I wrote. The forged version had flattened that curve, just slightly, just enough. Marcus had forged my signature. I drove home that evening in a kind of silence that felt like the inside of a room with no windows. Sandra was making dinner. She asked how my day was. I said fine. I sat at the kitchen table and watched her move around the kitchen, and I thought about the Thursday afternoons. I thought about the new car. I thought about the way Marcus had looked at dinner 2 weeks earlier. I thought about all the small things I had told myself were nothing. I did not say a word that night. Not because I had no words, because I needed to know how deep it went before I said anything at all. The next morning, I called a friend of mine named Pete who worked in financial compliance. I asked him if he could do me a personal favor and run a quiet check on a few accounts. I gave him the property address, Marcus's name, and the name of the notary firm Gerald had mentioned. Pete called me back in 48 hours. What he found changed the shape of everything. The notary firm was real but small. It had only 3 employees. One of those employees had a last name that matched Sandra's maiden name. It was her cousin. A man named Terrence, who Sandra had mentioned exactly once over the course of our marriage at a family reunion 6 years ago. I had not thought about him once since that day. Terrence had notarized the forged document. His name was right there on the stamp. Sandra had not just known about the forgery. Sandra had helped arrange it. I want to tell you what it feels like to have the floor disappear under you without moving. You are still sitting in your chair. Your coffee cup is still in your hand. The morning light is still coming through the same window, but something fundamental has changed, and the world that existed 5 minutes ago is already gone and you cannot get it back. That is what those 48 hours felt like. I sat with what Pete had told me, and I let myself feel the full weight of it before I did anything else. I needed to feel it. I needed to be honest with myself about how bad this actually was, because the temptation when you love someone is to immediately start building explanations that make them less guilty. I did not build those explanations. I built a folder instead. Over the next 3 weeks, I did something that David from 2 years ago would never have done. I documented everything, quietly, methodically, without telling anyone. I pulled every property record I could access through public filings. I found that the commercial land my father had left to Marcus was already in the process of being sold to a development company. The sale had been in negotiation for at least 8 months. Marcus had never mentioned it. The estimated value of that land was $420,000. Half of that was mine B. Why the terms of our father's will? Marcus had not spoken a single word to me about any of it. I checked the retirement account my father had left us. It had been drawn down by nearly $60,000 over the previous 3 years. The withdrawals were made under a power of attorney that I had apparently signed shortly after my father's funeral. I had no memory of signing any such document. I pulled the original paperwork from the estate records. The power of attorney had a notary stamp on it from the same firm, Terrence's firm, the same cousin, the same arrangement. This had been going on since before Marcus moved the Maplewood property. They had been building this structure for years, Marcus handling the legal manipulation, Sandra providing the family access and the notary connection, and me steady, reliable, trusting David walking through the middle of it every day without seeing a single thread. I had one more person I needed to speak to before I made any moves, my mother. I drove to see her on a Sunday. I did not bring Sandra. I told Sandra I was going alone because my mother had asked to speak with me privately about some health paperwork. Sandra did not blink. She told me to give her mother her love. I drove the 40 minutes to my mother's house with the folder on the passenger seat, and my hands completely steady on the wheel in the way that hands get when they have moved past fear into something quieter. My mother was sitting in her favorite chair by the window when I arrived. She looked smaller than I remembered from even a few months ago, the way people sometimes shrink during a long illness, but her eyes were sharp. She had always had sharp eyes. I sat across from her and I laid the folder on the coffee table and I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something and I need you to be honest with me." She looked at the folder and then she looked at me and something shifted in her expression. not guilt. More like the look of someone who had been holding a weight for a long time and could finally see a place to set it down. She said she had wondered how long it would take. My mother had known for 6 months that something was wrong with the estate documents. Her own lawyer, reviewing the paperwork for her updated will, had flagged an inconsistency in the Maplewood title. She had confronted Marcus privately. He had told her it was a paperwork error and that he was fixing it. She had believed him, or chosen to believe him, because the alternative was something she was not ready to accept about her own son. She looked at me across the coffee table and told me she was sorry. She said she should have called me immediately. She said she had convinced herself Marcus would make it right. I told her it was not her fault, and I meant it. Marcus had been her boy for 53 years. The same instinct that had kept me from asking harder questions was the same instinct that had kept her from asking them too. We were both loyal to someone who had decided that loyalty was a tool, not a value. My mother told me something else that afternoon, something that recontextualized almost everything. She said that about 2 years ago, Marcus had come to her privately and told her that he had information suggesting that Sandra had been unfaithful to me and that he was trying to protect me by handling the situation quietly. He had used that story to position himself as my protector, as the one looking out for me. And my mother, who loved me, had quietly given Marcus more latitude on estate matters because she believed he was acting from care. She had increased his access to certain accounts to help him manage what she thought was a family crisis he was shielding me from. There was no infidelity. Marcus had manufactured the story to gain my mother's trust and loosen her oversight of the estate accounts. He had used the fiction of protecting me to steal from me, and my mother had spent 2 years carrying a quiet grief about a betrayal that had never happened, while the real betrayal was being engineered right in front of her. I sat with my mother for 3 hours that afternoon. We looked through the folder together. She cried twice. Not dramatically, just quietly, in the way that older people cry when they understand something that they cannot ununderstand. When I left, she held my hand at the door for a long moment and told me to be careful about how I moved. She said Marcus was not stupid. She said he would feel the ground shift. She was right. I needed to move before he did. The following week, I retained a lawyer. Not a general practice lawyer, an estate litigation specialist named Carol who had been recommended by Gerald with 3 words: thorough, discreet, and fearless. I met Carol on a Wednesday morning and she listened to everything I told her without interrupting. She asked precise questions. She reviewed the copies of the documents I had brought. At the end of 2 hours, she said she believed I had a strong case for fraud, forgery. Why? Breach of fiduciary duty, and potentially conspiracy, depending on what further investigation revealed about Sandra's role. She told me 2 things I needed to hear. The first was that I should not confront anyone yet. Every conversation I had with Marcus or Sandra before the legal strategy was in place was a potential leak. The second thing she told me was that the commercial land sale Marcus had been negotiating was not yet complete. If we moved fast enough, we could file an injunction to halt the sale until the estate dispute was resolved. That would freeze $420,000 in place and prevent Marcus from liquidating the one asset that would have made the fraud nearly impossible to reverse. We filed the injunction on a Friday afternoon. I was home making dinner when Marcus called me that evening. His voice was measured, but I could hear something underneath it, a vibration of controlled panic that I recognized immediately because I had heard it before years ago when his first business was collapsing and he was trying to hide how bad things had gotten. He said he had received some paperwork from a law firm and wanted to know if I had heard anything strange about the family estate. He said it casually, like we were both surprised, like he had no idea who had filed the paperwork. I told him I had heard a few things. I said I was looking into it with some professional help. I kept my voice calm, easy, like a man who had just noticed a mildly interesting problem he was getting around to. I could hear his breathing change. He said we should talk in person. I said that sounded good. I said I would check my calendar and get back to him. I never called him back. Sandra was quieter than usual that evening. She had been in the kitchen during the phone call. She had heard my side of the conversation. She did not ask me about it. She finished the dishes and went to bed early. I sat in the living room for a long time that night with the lights dim and thought about the version of this life I had believed I was living. The version where my wife loved me and my brother was difficult but fundamentally loyal and my family was imperfect but intact. That version had been gone for years. I was just the last one to get the news. The next proof object came from a direction I had not anticipated. It arrived in the form of a text message sent to the wrong person. Marcus, apparently in a moment of panic after receiving the injunction paperwork, had sent a message intended for Sandra to a group family chat that included me, our two aunts, and my mother. The message said 3 sentences. It said the lawyer move was faster than expected. It said to stick to the story about the paperwork error. And it said that if David found the full account trail, they were done. He deleted it within 4 minutes. But by then 3 people had already seen it. Both of my aunts called me within the hour. My mother called me the same evening and said she had taken a screenshot. Marcus did not know about the screenshot. Sandra did not know I knew about Terrence. Neither of them knew that Carol already had subpoenas prepared for 3 separate financial institutions. And neither of them knew that Gerald, who had originally discovered the title discrepancy, had been building his own documentation file for 8 months before I ever called him. He had a professional obligation, he told me later, and a personal one. He had known my father for 20 years. The meeting happened on a Thursday morning, 3.5 weeks after I filed the injunction. Carol had requested a formal mediation session with Marcus and his lawyer. She had not told them the full scope of what we had. She had shown them enough to make the forgery case clear, but held back the retirement account withdrawals, the power of attorney documents, and the text message screenshot. She wanted to see how they would respond when they thought they could still manage the damage. I sat across a conference table from my brother for the first time in nearly 6 weeks. He looked different, thinner in the face. He had a lawyer next to him, a man I did not recognize, who kept his expression professionally blank. Marcus looked at me when I walked in, and I held his eye and did not look away. I wanted him to know that I was not the David who had been in that kitchen making coffee while they made their plans. I was not going to look confused or wounded or forgiving. I sat down and opened my folder and waited. Marcus's lawyer opened by suggesting the title transfer had been a mistake made in good faith during the estate transition period, and that his client was willing to correct the error immediately. He used the word error 4 times in 3 minutes. Carol let him finish. Then she placed 3 documents on the table. The forged signature comparison prepared by a forensic document examiner we had retained. The notary records connecting Terrence to both the title deed and the power of attorney. And a printed copy of the text message screenshot, time-stamped and certified. Marcus looked at the text message for a long moment. Then he looked at me. And for the first time in as long as I could remember, my brother had nothing to say. His lawyer asked for a recess. Carol agreed to 15 minutes. During the recess, I walked to the window and looked down at the street below and felt something I had not expected. Not triumph, not rage, something quieter, a kind of resolution. The feeling of a weight that you have been carrying for so long you stopped noticing it finally being set down. When we resumed, Marcus's lawyer made a substantially different proposal. Full restitution of the Maplewood property title. A settlement figure covering the retirement account withdrawals. Marcus's removal from any further role in the estate administration. And a formal legal agreement prohibiting any further transfers, sales, or encumbrances on any asset covered by our father's original will without dual consent and independent legal review. Carol looked at me. I nodded once. She turned back to the table and said we would review the proposal with one addition. The commercial land sale that had been halted by the injunction was to be formally canceled, and the property was to be relisted under independent estate management. No private negotiation, no back-channel sale, any future sale to proceed with full transparency and equal distribution according to the original will. Marcus's lawyer made a note. He said his client would agree. I walked out of that conference room 3 hours after I walked in. The air outside was cool and clear. Carol walked with me to the corner and said the formal paperwork would take a few weeks, but the hard part was done. I thanked her. She said I had done the harder part myself. What I had not done yet was talk to Sandra. I had been sleeping in the guest room for 2 weeks by then, telling her it was because of back pain. She had not pressed the issue. She moved around the house carefully. The way you move around someone you know is dangerous even when they are quiet. She had not asked about the legal proceedings. I think she had decided that if she did not name it, it could not fully land. I sat down with her on a Sunday evening. I put the folder on the table between us. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I looked at her and asked her to tell me what she knew and when she knew it. She sat very still for a long moment, then she told me. She had known about the title plan for 2 years. Marcus had come to her first, not my mother, and told her that the estate was being mismanaged and that I was too passive to protect our financial interests. He had told her that the best move was to secure the properties under his management and that David would benefit in the long run. She had believed him initially, or wanted to believe him, because she and Marcus had always had a similar way of thinking about money. Aggressive, forward-moving, not patient. She said she had told herself it was for us, for our future, that I would understand eventually. I asked her when she stopped believing that. She looked at the table and said probably about a year in, when she realized the money was going somewhere she did not have visibility into. She said she had brought it up with Marcus and he had told her to trust the process. She said she had felt trapped by then, complicit without getting what she had been promised. She said she had not known how to tell me because too much time had passed and she had been afraid. I listened to all of it. I did not interrupt. When she was done, I sat for a moment and then I said one thing. I said that the fear of being caught was not the same as regret for what had been done, and that she needed to be honest with herself about which one she was feeling. She started to cry. I got up and went to the kitchen and made a cup of tea and sat alone for a long time. The divorce was not dramatic. There was no screaming, no public scene. I told her what I needed, a clean separation, a fair split of the marital assets, and her full cooperation with any further legal proceedings related to the estate matter. She agreed to all of it. Her lawyer and mine handled the paperwork over the following 2 months. She moved out on a Saturday morning with 2 carloads of her things. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. I did not feel what I expected to feel. I felt tired, mostly. And underneath the tired, very slowly, something that felt like air. Marcus and I did not speak for 7 months after the mediation. Then one afternoon in late autumn, he called me. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that was 3 minutes long, and I listened to it once. He said he had been wrong. He said the pressure of debt and business failure had made him justify things he should never have justified. He said he missed me. He said he hoped we could eventually find a way back. I did not call him back that day. I called my mother instead and told her about the message. She listened quietly. Then she said something I have thought about many times since. She said that forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. She said I was allowed to forgive someone and still never hand them the pen again. The estate was fully restored to its original structure by the end of that year. The Maplewood property was back in my name. The retirement account withdrawals were fully restituted. The commercial land was eventually sold through an independent estate manager, and the proceeds split exactly as my father had intended. Gerald attended the final document signing and afterward shook my hand for a long time without saying anything. Sometimes the silence of a man who knew your father is the most meaningful thing in the room. I kept the house. I renovated the kitchen the following spring, the project Sandra had always said we would do together and never got around to. I did it myself over 3 weekends with the radio on. I put in the countertops I had always wanted and the deep sink that Sandra had thought was unnecessary. It was the best renovation I had ever done. I stood at the finished sink on a Sunday morning with my coffee and looked out the backyard window at the garden that was just starting to come in, and I thought about my father. My father used to say that a man's character is visible most clearly in what he does when nobody is watching. He said it about integrity, about doing the right thing when there was no audience and no applause. I had spent 11 years believing that the people around me were living by something close to that standard. That belief had cost me a great deal, but the process of uncovering the truth, of documenting and strategizing and staying calm when every part of me wanted to either explode or collapse, had taught me something about my own character that I would not trade. I was not a man who broke under weight. I was a man who built things. Even from what was broken 2 years after the mediation, I received a card from Marcus at Christmas. It was simple, no long speech. Just his handwriting and 4 words, "I am truly sorry." I put it on the kitchen counter and looked at it for a few days. Then I put it in a drawer, not the forgetting kind of drawer. The kind where you keep things you are still deciding what to do with. Some betrayals do not get a clean ending. They get an honest one, and sometimes honest is better. I am David. I paid for things with money, time, and trust that I will never get back from those years. But I have everything my father wanted me to have, managed exactly as he intended, protected by the kind of documentation and counsel that I should have put in place from the beginning. I do not wake up angry anymore. I wake up early, I make coffee, I stand at the good sink, and I think about what I am building next. I think my father would be okay with how this ended.